Hello, good evening, and welcome back to the Majority Show, broadcast live across YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook every Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. I'm your host, Mark Devlin. This is Scotland's #1 politics and chat show from an anti-nationalist or pro-UK perspective, whichever you would like to say. I'm here tonight with my co-host, Mary Devlin, who you all know, of course, and Dean Thomson, who is standing in for Mark Zegfeld, who has a personal issue and can't be on the show tonight. Hi there, Dean. How are you?
I'm good. Good as always.
And what are you going to be talking about today?
Well, I'll be discussing Humza Yusuf's unfortunate history of proximity to extremists, and also the potential human consequences of his council tax freeze wheeze on the most vulnerable in Scottish society.
Right, Mary, what are you up to?
Tonight, I'm going to be talking about a warning that police budget cuts are leaving Scotland vulnerable to terrorist attacks.
Oh, that is not good at all.
Nope.
And I'll be asking, along with the rest of them, is Humza Yusuf the de facto First Minister of Gaza?
And, of course, we have Zoomer of the Week.
That's right. All that and much more will be coming your way just in a few seconds. So see you soon. Welcome back to the Majority Show, Scotland's #1 pro-UK politics chat. How about that? Our aim is a better Scotland without the toxic nationalism that is strangling Scotland's potential. As usual, huge thanks to UK Union Voice and United Against Separation Facebook pages, where many of you are watching tonight. I'm here tonight with co-hosts Mary Devlin and writer from Think Scotland and former lecturer Dean Thomson. Hi, Dean. How are you today?
Good for Wednesday night.
Well, that's very good. Okay, well, let's tell us a little bit about your background.
Glasgow boy, born and bred in Glasgow. Highland grandparents, still got family croft now to Hebrides.
Oh, really? Okay.
Graduated Masters at Glasgow University in Development Studies. Went off to China to lecture Anglo-American society and culture. Part and parcel of that was what makes Americans, British, history, political systems, literature movements, all of that kind of thing. Came back to the UK. Brian Monteith recruited me for Think Scotland, and I've been writing for them ever since. In terms of my interest in Scottish politics, why this particular bailiwick? Well, undergrad was Stirling Uni. I was vice president of the Union of Jewish Students Association there. I was vice president of the Stirling Uni Conservative Students, and my uncle was an MP for many, many, many years. Not the Conservative Party, though, leading to many interesting family debates and discussions.
Right, sure. Yeah. You mentioned there actually talking about what it means to be British or American. You know, and you probably saw that discussion that was going on Twitter this week. What does it mean to be British? And I actually opined in this a while back, and that the emphasis was on the United, actually, in the United Kingdom, that it allows the UK as so many different cultures all wrapped into one. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, what it means to be British. The UK's cultural and political identity, you can actually trace it. If I avoid being technical, you could think of the key figures. Sir John Fortescue in 1560s. He was a judge. You've got Thomas Eliot. He was a diplomat. Thomas Starkey, all the way through to Edmund Burke. You could define Englishness, and by extension, the UK with the Union later, is this idea of thought would be anchored in place. It's very cult-specific, and the Union reflects it, the unwritten parliament. All of this is an expression of it's our own unique way of doing things. And I often think if Cromwell had not... if you think of the key difference between America and Britain, it would be Cromwell failing and the restoration of the Stuarts. Because if Cromwell's republic had survived, we'd probably have ended up like America. with a
Yes.
formal constitution, the separation of powers.
Sure.
Because a lot of the right, if you think of John Adams, one of the American founding fathers, a huge amount of his writings was talking about this idea. He was going back to this idea of parliamentary sovereignty mixed in with the sovereign, because of course they wanted to replace the king with a president. But you can, even in the American House of Congress today, they still have a sergeant at arms, just like the House of Commons does. There's tremendous overlaps even today. So America and Britain, very close, but you can see the historical divergences. But Britain's a story of being rooted in place, a thought, a particular cultural way of doing things, which is quite removed from continental Europe. Because we never had revolutionary Marxism, we never had anything like that. And that's because the UK has always had a very cloistered, detached cultural expression, even though you have 1066 and the Normans and so forth.
Okay. Well, I think that's more like a historical perspective, though. Most people are kind of like say, okay, it's beans and toast and stuff like that, right?
It's a great problem you have, because you listen to some of these politicians. What does it mean to be British? Well, diversity, and we all like to be nice. But, that's not really enough to describe a country, a culture, and a civilization, is it?
Right. Well, I suppose there's lots of different ways of looking at it. Mary, you've got something to say, I think?
No, I didn't. No.
Oh, right. Okay. Sharing is caring. Wherever you are, please like, share, subscribe, comment, and tell friends. Extend our reach at the click of a button.
And as usual, I'll be handling all the comments tonight, so please make them short and snappy. I'll try to get as many up on screen as I can.
Right, okay, we'll be back in just a second. Start talking about Humza Yousaf and Gaza. Right, following on from the barbaric attacks on Israeli civilians, Humza Yousaf. My phone is talking to me.
What is your phone saying, Mark?
Is that Siri?
Oh, Jesus. Right, anyway, following on from the barbaric attacks on Israeli civilians, Humza Yousaf has been on TV every day pleading the case for Palestinian civilians. This ostensibly is driven by a concern for his in-laws who are currently stuck in Gaza. So considering all this, and we're going to go into this in some detail, is Humza Yousaf the de facto First Minister of Gaza? Starting with, let's have a look at the evidence. First of all, he gave 500,000 in aid to Gaza not that long ago. Was that maybe last week? Dean, I think.
Yeah, he made the announcement.
Right, and there was no money to Israel in that one at all, no mention of Israel, in fact, at all. But more importantly, and something we were trying to talk about last week, we had some technical issues which seem to come up every week, was his call for Palestinian refugees to be settled in Scotland. Now, Dean, you have some thoughts on this whole issue. Should these Palestinians be settled in Scotland?
No, that would be my simple answer, and I'll explain why. First thing to consider: what's the best policy to help refugees? Well, the chief of the United Nations World Food Programme says, most refugees want to stay in the proximity of the country they leave because they aim to go back. Secondly, it's 16 times more cost effective to keep Palestinian refugees in, say, Jordan than, say, forced immigration to Europe. So if you want to help more people, it's better to keep them in the Levant, in the Middle East. And also, if you listen to Egypt and you listen to Jordan, there's perhaps a reason why they don't really want to open their doors. President Sisi of Egypt has talked about the dangers of terrorism if you had real Palestinian settlement in the Sinai. He talked to AP News that there was a risk of, quote, a launch pad being in Sinai in Egypt of Palestinian terror organizations, them using Egyptian territory to attack Israel, which would be
but isn't it really? I mean, I don't know if that's a bit overstated because perhaps because it's all desert there, right? I mean, it's not really livable land.
There are the potential for places for there are towns in the Sinai Peninsula,
right?
But you could have refugee camps and so forth. They have been in more desolate locations.
Yes,
it's in terms of security, You can imagine Muslim Brotherhood, let's not forget, was key mover in overthrowing Mubarak in 2011. There's a reason the Egyptian military don't want to risk having people with inculcated under Hamas rules for 17 odd years. They don't want them in their country. And you can imagine Jordan as well. The Jordanian king has warned that Arab public opinion would be inflamed if you had Palestinians leave Palestinian territory and not be allowed back. That would end the solution, and the Arab world would go up in flames. So all the noises are from the Arab countries, worries about terrorism, worries about political instability. We don't really think they should leave the Palestinian territories for political reasons.
Anyway,
it's all very complicated, but I don't see how forced relocation to Europe is in any way an answer when the United Nations Food Programme says it's actually more cost effective to keep them in the Middle East.
Well, I mean, I think that's one side of it, definitely. The other side of it, of course, is what happens when these refugees do come to Europe, a country they don't have any connection, or not a country, continent perhaps, they don't really have any connection with. We've seen huge increases in crime in different countries, trying to integrate, particularly in Sweden, I think, trying to integrate these cultures in Germany as well. And I think perhaps more than that, people are really fed up about this idea of more immigration from countries that is, I mean, if Jordan and Israel are not going, Jordan and Egypt are not going to take them, then why on earth should Scotland take them? I think many people would say that. I mean, would you agree that there would be problems for people coming to Scotland? I mean, why do you think he's... Actually, a better question perhaps is, why is Humza Yousaf suggesting this?
Oh, pure politics. It's pure politics. They've lost Rutherglen by-election. They're drawn equal with Scottish Labour in the polls. The conference was moribund and lacked any kind of enthusiasm. Humza Yousaf is reaching out and he wants to do the old go-to trick. Virtuous Holyrood under the SNP, big nasty Tory Westminster, look how regressive they are. And what's lost in translation was he signals his virtue. Come all ye faithful, bring unto us all the poor of the world. It's not what the United Nations says is best for the refugees. It's not good for anyone because of the cultural dynamic, because they've left, if they've had to flee a war zone, the trauma, the insecurities, they want to be somewhere culturally familiar. They don't want to be shoved into
another trauma.
Scotland.
Yes, they arrive.
Sorry, can I ask a question at this point? Is it within Humza Yousaf's remit to even bring Palestinians into Scotland?
I can answer that. It's easy enough.
Is it the UK Home Office?
Yes,
they would
it's a reserved issue. Immigration is reserved.
So it's all just signalling his virtue. There's no actual intent to do anything to help anyone. He just wants to make Westminster.
As usual.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Seems likely. I mean, of course, when the refugees arrived in Dundee, they were like, "Oh my God, this is a war zone. We better get back." Somewhere safe.
Grumpy Git is saying that.
No offense to people from Dundee. Anyway.
No, we love Dundee.
Yes, actually, it's good.
Grumpy Git is saying folk are struggling to see a GP. They get a hospital appointment, but Humza is saying bring the injured to Scotland for our NHS to treat them.
Oh yes, I did see that.
We'll get people waiting. If you try to get to an A&E, you're waiting. There's no way. There was only about 50%, less than 50% of people are being seen in less than the 4 hours.
There's another solution. They could to declare peace with Israel, and Israel has got a lot of really good hospitals as well. Moving on, we're going to move on to so Humza Yousaf continued his grandstanding on this issue with a call for a ceasefire. And then had the audacity to try and grumble about Keir Starmer. I think let's see if this video will work.
You spoke to the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak yesterday, reiterating the Scottish Government's calls for a ceasefire to allow more aid into the country. The UK Government not joining your calls at the moment. Neither is the Leader of the Opposition, Sir Keir Starmer. Can I just ask what you make of his position at the moment?
I find it infuriating. We're seeing thousands of people die. Children die. How many more children have to die before a ceasefire is called for? I mean, we're calling for a ceasefire. I cannot understand Sir Keir Starmer's position. I cannot understand the Prime Minister's position. And I asked them, how many more children have to die before you join us and join many across the world, including the United Nations, and call for that ceasefire? Call all parties, not just one party here, call on all parties to commit to a ceasefire for the sake of those innocent children who are suffering.
Oh, for God's sake, I can't even listen to any more of that. Right.
Insufferable.
It's insufferable. I hate that I hate that kind of earnest, soft voice he's got. It just drives me up the wall. But anyway, that irrespective of the delivery method, what about the content? What do you think of this idea of a ceasefire?
Well, I take that off. I think it demonstrates a very common and profound ignorance of international law and what would actually be the right side of history here. Let's start with the basic morality of it. A ceasefire now means a very simple equation. Murder Jewish babies plus hide behind Palestinian babies equals Hamas gets away with it. I don't think I can live with that, and I don't see how that's a moral suggestion. No. Let's not forget who's triggered this crisis. Those were the throat-chopping, cutting terrorists. On the legal point, the ceasefire stuff gets caught up in the proportionality. It's annoying. You hear it on the BBC all the time, and the people spouting it don't know what they're talking about. I was talking to a KC a couple of days ago because I'm going to be writing an article about this at some point. So I wanted to know exactly what a lawyer's perspective on this is. And he said, it does not matter. Sorry, proportionality does not mean defensive force has to be equal to the force used in the attack. Put that another way. In Pearl Harbor, the Americans don't have to just sink an equal number of ships as the Japanese did.
Yes, of course.
That's just nonsense in terms of proportionality. And what matters is the proportionality has to be measured against the defensive objective, which in Israel's case is to repel, prevent, and stop further attacks, and to basically remove Hamas's ability to wage any kind of war, and to remove it structurally, basically the destruction of Hamas's capacity. In that context, it's totally legally unreasonable to say a ceasefire now. Israel's well within its right. Israel's well within its rights to do what any other country does. The anti-Semitism from the usual suspects, you can hear the ringing of it. Corbyn, Diane Abbott, Humza Yousaf et al. The usual people with that curious blind spot when it comes to Jewish people in Israel and anti-Semitism. Israel must have a ceasefire, even without its legally sound defensive objectives being realized.
Well, it feels like sometimes a little bit like they want to call a ceasefire. They would have called a ceasefire before the Hamas attack and just let Hamas attack them. That's the feeling I get from that. It's like immediately they're calling for restraint, proportionality, all this type of stuff. And then, as you saw very clearly there, Humza Yousaf was using this idea: how many children have to die? How many children? And I've been arguing with people all day about this on Twitter and said, how many children have actually died? Because the only number that we have for children dying is from Hamas itself. And we all saw what happened in the hospital bombing last week when they said that 800 people died, or 500 even, whatever it was. And in the end, it was a tenth of that, perhaps. And there's nothing at all to say that this number of children is totally inflated. So what Humza Yousaf is basically saying is, I'm using Hamas's numbers of dead children that are unverified, and they're being used for propaganda to stop the retaliation, or not retaliation, to stop action being taken against the people who actually killed children.
It's Israel has no right to defend itself. Even though the international legal situation here is sound, and there's something deeper about this. I hear this all the time from the useful idiots in the West that seem to mimic the Hamas talking points. It's almost like a numbers game for these people. 1,500 people died in Israel, so you've had your 3,000 over here. That's time to call it quits. And what's lost is this sort of important moral point of, the two sides here, Hamas and Israel, shouldn't we be wondering about what kind of future they're trying to build?
Yes.
Isn't that also something that gets lost
Yes.
with these people just sort of throw around? Well, you've had your 3,000 killed there.
Well, it's also it's actually, I was saying to Mary earlier on today, I was reading.
Yeah, it's not tit for tat.
I was reading something. It's so hard to get through this layer of the genocide, dead kids, all this type of stuff. You're like, what do you actually want? Okay, you want a two-state solution. Does Hamas want a two-state solution? No, they don't want a two-state solution. So where are we now? Okay, that's the thing. So why are we not talking about that, for example, or why are we not talking about? I mean, it's, as you say, proportionality. What we're talking about actually, where we can go forward with this. There is no way forward. Actually, the reality is, that Hamas has to be eliminated before any discussion can take place.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I just say that some of our viewers are wondering why we're discussing this so much on the show. And the reason that we're doing that is because Humza Yousaf, who's our First Minister, has really weighed into this situation when actually it's really got nothing to do with him.
Yes, and that's actually...
other than a personal situation, which we do understand. And that's why we're discussing it on the show.
Yes, and actually this is the next point. I'm just going to go on to that, in fact. I mean, should this even be discussed in the Scottish Parliament? Now, they had a debate in the Parliament, and I was going to show something from Douglas Ross there. I'll just show just a couple of seconds of it, right? Douglas Ross,
from the tyranny, exploitation, and oppression of Hamas.
He did quite a good speech there. But the thing is, why was that even necessary? We, Scots, made the Scottish Parliament to deal with Scottish issues. It's not to deal with foreign issues at all. It's got no remit in foreign affairs, and it has basically it now seems to be acting as a kind of parallel government, and where Humza Yousaf is allowed to get headlines every day about Gaza that are against what the two leaders of the two main parties believe. And what the UK government believes. And in doing so, they're forgetting a lot of other stuff that should actually be talked about. Now, do we hear what about the storm that destroyed the northeast there, and nothing there? I mean, but it's all about, this crisis and this personal aspect of the crisis that is Humza Yousaf's in-laws who are trapped in Gaza. I mean, what do you think about the use of the Scottish Parliament in this way, Dean?
I thoroughly disapprove of it. I think foreign policy should be left to the Foreign Office. Seems perfectly reasonable to me. They seem to have the embassy networks, the know-how, the skills, the training, and Humza Yousaf has a history of failing upwards. So I wouldn't trust him to run a foreign policy anyway. But I do think it's rather cynical. I think, as I say, it's the SNP playbook. Virtuous SNP, big nasty Westminster, is creating dividing lines, is trying to create differences and squabbles and grievances. And they're doing it on a foreign policy issue that is far too serious for them to really justifiably do it. And also, as you say, one wonders about the perhaps personal issues if clouding and affecting his judgment as well.
Yeah, so someone mentioned to me today that should be an issue for the ministerial code, and I think I put it in here somewhere. Yep. Basically, that said, excuse me, I can't turn the page. Well, it was in here. Basically, ministerial code, it doesn't allow you to have personalised, as it were, politics. And there is some issue, I think, here as well with Humza Yousaf saying, we are going to let in refugees and we are going to, we support a ceasefire without it actually going through a parliamentary process in any way. Is there any debate on this ceasefire issue? No, there's been no debate in the parliament. So what we've got is a politician who's grandstanding, something very similar actually. Someone else said to me today, this is Humza's pandemic. He's got a daily platform to spout whatever he wants and criticise whoever he wants without any parliamentary scrutiny. Mm-hmm. And I think many Scots don't want that. They don't want a president. It was bad enough when Sturgeon was doing it, making all the decisions centralised. But now we've got, at least the pandemic affected the Scotland, right? Now we've got this nonsense going on as well, right?
And one thing that I noticed in a headline that of course, this is very politically convenient. Humza would rather everyone was we're talking about Palestinian refugees and all of this kind of stuff, because one of the things ticking in the background is the inquiry into the SNP under Sturgeon's mishandling of the COVID pandemic and care homes. And there's a lot ticking in the background that they just don't want people to hear about or notice. So it's wag the dog. Don't look over there, look over here.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah.
Right, okay, we're going to take a very, very brief break, and we're going to come back, and we're going to talk about Humza's connections to Hamas. And Dean's written an article about that, so he'll quite interested to find out more about that. Back in a second. Right, thank you for being with us tonight. We're here every Wednesday night and with you, and it's great to see all the usual suspects, as it were, on the comments there, and thank you for sending them in. Thank you also, Mary, for handling all of them. Hundreds come in every day.
Yep.
Okay, right, so Humza has does Humza have connections to Hamas? I wanted to say a wee disclaimer here, though. There are many Muslims in the UK and Scotland who want nothing to do with the actions of their co-religionists. Many came here to escape political and religious oppression, and we hope that their voices are not lost in the drive towards polarisation. But let's talk about Humza in this case, who seems to be quite willing to polarise the issue. When he was a youngster in Parliament, he called Hamas a resistance movement against colonial oppression and the backbone of Palestinian resistance. He also invited an ex-Hamas leader to the Scottish Parliament. Dean, tell us more about that.
Well, the date is January 17th, 2008. The setting is Holyrood Parliament, and probably one of the most troubling, for me, someone with Jewish connections, probably one of the most troubling moments in devolved history that never gets talked about. January 17th, 2008, the Scottish Islamic Foundation, SIF, founded by Humza Yousaf. He helped found it. It was chief exec, was his cousin, Osama Saeed. They organise a meeting in the Holyrood Parliament, and people who were invited to meet the then Minister for Europe, External Affairs and Culture was Linda Fabiani, was Humza Yousaf, his cousin Osama Saeed, and also Mohammed Sawala, Anas al-Takriti, and Ismail Patel. Now, the problem is these three people, Salawa, Takriti, and Patel, are known Islamist extremists. Now, the question becomes, let's be fair, would it have been reasonable for Humza Yousaf in 2008 to have known that Mohammed Sawala was a former Hamas commander in the West? Would that have been a reasonable thing to have known? Well, let's start. In the article, one of the things I point out, in 2006, and I include a link to the transcript of the BBC programme. In 2006, the BBC Panorama produced a programme which was Faith, Hate and Charity, and that talked about, among other things, the Hamas connections of the former Hamas terror leader. So this is Panorama, 2006, height of the war on terror. Is it reasonable that the now First Minister would not have known anything about his background, or if he didn't know, could not have found out without a cursory investigation? I'll leave that up to other people's judgment. What I will say, to further dig into this, is we should talk about the SIF a little bit more, because this is also part of the background mood music. The Scottish Islamic Foundation described itself as a lobbying group, and the first chief executive was Osama Saeed. The first minister was, in 2008, for about a year, a director of the organization as well. And this is an organization that was described by the counter-extremism foundation Quilliam as, quote, providing a platform for a wide range of high-profile Islamists. And we're organizing a meeting, bringing three Islamists to meet in the Scottish Parliament. And after that 2008 January meeting, the SNP government gave over £400,000 of taxpayers' money in grants to the SIF. And it just so happens that the Times wrote articles about cronyism allegations, and Hannah Said went on to be a candidate for the SNP. That's dead, Mr. Youssef.
Yeah, I saw that here. We got some. I'll put these links in the description later. This is from Gatestone Institute from 2013, actually, and then we have another one as well about Osama Saeed, who's Humza's cousin, and he wrote this interesting article. It was way back 17 years ago, basically on why a caliphate was a good idea. So it's a bit difficult to find. It's also a little bit difficult to find out the real motivations, of course, of these people, because they've got charity on one side, and some parts of their organisations are actually perhaps progressive in some way. But then it all seems as though there's something kind of dragging them down. But in general, the SNP does seem to have an issue with terrorist support, perhaps. Let's put it that way. I mean, we have this other issue. They brought the Greens into the Parliament, and at the time there was a huge debate with Nicola Sturgeon, because she brought them in even though they had extremist views on Israel. Patrick Harvey and Lorna Slater did not endorse and still refuse to endorse the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. And they have voted in favour of a motion that describes Israel as a racist state based on Jewish supremacy and called Zionism a racist endeavour. So Sturgeon went to try to get through this by saying, I would hope everyone would sign up to the HRA definition. The Scottish Government's position on anti-Semitism is clear. But that's just like a hope, wasn't it?
It's a wing and a prayer.
Yeah, it's a wing and a prayer here. And she asked if the Scottish Greens could continue in her government if they don't accept a definition. The response was clear, they are in my government. Of course, that had its, recently we saw the Greens, Maggie Chapman and Ross Greer basically saying it was Israel's fault before the Hamas terrorism. You any thoughts on the Greens?
The Greens, since 2005, have refused to accept that Hamas is a terrorist organisation. Since 2005, in their party motion to that was passed in that particular year, they said they do not recognise Hamas as a terrorist organisation. They continue to retain that position. Even now, they've not walked that back, that I've been able to find. So that kind of casts a bit of a mood music that kind of gives you an insight into perhaps, I remember writing a Think Scotland article about spontaneous sincerity. I find it a very amusing psychological thing, where it's kind of like the drunk at the bar. He'll tell you exactly how the world works and how it all is. And the next morning, he'll wake up and think, oh God, what did I say? And you try and put the genie back in the bottle. That kind of happened with the Scottish Green MSPs. The day we're getting on their live news feeds, 1,500 people massacred in brutal, horrific circumstances. The Scottish Green Maggie Chapman says, well, it is a consequence, quote, consequence of occupation, blah, blah, blah. And the parallel occurred to me that 1940s Germany, as Jews are being pushed onto the cattle trucks, shrug of the shoulders, well, they shouldn't have undermined the German economy. Kind of sounds as a parallel, like Maggie Chapman saying, well, they shouldn't have been occupiers in the land that they have thousands and thousands of years claim to.
Yes. Well, it just continues. I think one thing's very interesting. I talked to quite a lot of Jewish people in my years, and one thing that you do find out is when you go into any Jewish person's family history, it's basically just constant oppression, running from one country to another, family members being murdered, killed. It just goes on and on. It goes back and back and back, and you're like, geez, this is not really a good situation. Now, in addition to those connections with SNP, going back to Humza, his wife said Israeli terror had left her family wanting to die. And I think we all saw on Twitter or many of us saw on Twitter, a video of her talking about occupation and all this. I'm not sure if she said the rivers, from the rivers to the sea.
She did. She did in her conference, the First Minister's wife, in the conference speech to the SNP. She did completely misrepresent and, in fact, lie about the Israeli defense minister. She said Israel has pledged to level Gaza. They're going to target. They called Palestinians animals, and the Israeli defense minister. And this is from the Huffington Post, not exactly a right-wing news source. It's very liberal. Yes. The Huffington Post was there in the room, and their article says, no, he was talking about Hamas terrorists. So she, is loose with the facts, completely misrepresenting, and it inflames an already inflamed situation. And I don't know what that's in aid of.
Yes, I mean the question here is they've got the family connections, they've got this Islamist charity connections, Hamas, meeting the Hamas people, and then this strange coincidence of the family in-laws being in Gaza against Foreign Office advice. And the thing I'd like to do is just find for the media to ask them, why are we here? Why did you come here now? Mm-hmm. And do any of your relatives support Hamas? What do they think of the hostage situation? Because we're always talking about themselves and how many bottles of water they've got left. What about the actual hostages? And are they complying with any of the Israeli demands to move out of harm's way? And, these type of things. And media is just like, well, there's no media. That's the problem. We're just getting these Humza Yousaf pronouncements and we're getting his family's videos all the time. And, of course, no one wants any harm to come to them, but it's not a balanced situation. Do you think Humza Yousaf should recuse himself?
I think if he can't stop talking about this particular issue, then it might be good for him to recuse himself, because he's personally involved. And don't get me wrong, we're all tremendously sympathetic to a situation where your wife's parents are trapped in the middle of a war zone. Who wouldn't be sympathetic to that? But it also, who wouldn't be emotionally compromised by that?
Yes, that's good.
And that's the key point. And because he has a duty to represent all Scots, Christians, atheists, Jewish, Islamic, Sikhs, Glasgow's a surprisingly diverse place, and so is wider Scotland. And you need to be a First Minister who's able to have the emotional wherewithal to not allow your emotional state to be influencing policy in ways that might result in an inflamed debate. Because
there's
anti-Semitic hate crimes, and that we have to face that reality.
Yeah, I think there's a case for Humza Yousaf to keep his mouth shut, really, and deal with things privately. You could say this is a private matter with the family. We're trying to get them out. That's it. Okay, and by the way, there's been a big storm up in the northeast of Scotland. That's what we really need to be focusing on here.
A lot of people have been flooded out.
What's happening for the people in Brecon? Right. They're not getting £500,000
Why did
at the moment.
The multi-million flood defences that were the Scottish Government built fail? I'd like to know.
So those type of questions, but you say perhaps that's a distraction. Right, okay, we were going to do a section on council tax, but we're going to skip that actually, sorry, Dean, and we're going to move on in a minute to Mary's thing about police cuts, because it kind of ties in a little bit with what we've got here. All right, so we're back in a second. Yes, okay. Right, thank you very much for being with us today on the show, watching. I think Dean's has got a lot of really interesting stuff to say on the conflict and what's been happening in Scotland around that. If you do like what we do in the show, please do donate. You can donate on YouTube with the super thanks, the super chat, donations wee button there. If that's not your thing, you could please donate to using the majority's donation page, which is on our website. And anything you can donate is great. Donations start from just £2 a month, or lump sum.
Yeah, I think many people watching the show are maybe not regular donors, but as Mark said, it starts from just £2 a month. So if you can, we really appreciate it. It helps to keep the lights on and the software working and everything.
Yes.
Thank you.
makeup. That's what's all going on. Right. Okay, Mary. So what your segment? Here we go.
Yes. So earlier this month, David Kennedy, who is the head of the Scottish Police Federation, there were headlines from him saying that he was warning that people may die in Scotland due to cuts in police numbers. And now he's warning us that the same cuts to police officers also make Scotland vulnerable to terrorists.
Oh, okay.
He says there have been so many cuts to the number of police officers that the police force is now very limited in its intelligence gathering and rapid response capability, and it's getting worse as officer numbers continue to get cut. So he's issued the warning at the time when just as MI5 are saying that they're considering putting the UK on high alert because of the tensions we've been talking about between Hamas and Israel. So we've come into a very worrying time in Scotland, and at that same time, we're cutting the number of police. So David Kennedy says, countering the threat of terror attacks is all about intelligence, and community policing is the cornerstone of intelligence gathering. It's about information from members of the public saying someone has moved in here or that they've been seeing some sort of suspicious behaviour. It relies on relationships built up through trust. But that is how terror threats are detected. And the problem is that we're stripping community policing out of Scotland. It's becoming eradicated. And he says that anyone who tells you these cuts are not seriously impacting on the ability of Police Scotland to adequately fight terror is simply not telling you the truth. I find this quite worrying.
Yeah,
what do you guys think?
Well, Dean, do you have anything to say on this?
I remember at the time, going back a while, when the Scottish Police Federation was created and you had this forces all merged together, people were saying this is a cover for savings, streamlining the service, and we're seeing that play out. Large portions, of course, big part of this is also underfunding of the police service in Scotland. I mean, large chunks of the police estate, the physical estate, is completely run down. So some of the buildings have to be sold off, given away, because the cost to refurbish them would be astronomical. So this is a consequence of poor decision making going back many years. You don't end up with you don't end up with police shortages, the kind of budget cuts, the shortages in community policing. All these things take years to happen.
Well, I think you're exactly right, because the police numbers are at the lowest level since the creation of Police Scotland. And there's warnings of a further loss of 600 officers as a result of budget cuts as well. So we used to have, back in 2013, 10 years ago, there were just under 17,500 police officers. Now we're down to just over 16,600.
Well, that was the point that Catherine made here. If you worked for Police Scotland 10 years ago, the figure of 17,234 police was drummed into you, as no doubt a matter of pride, perhaps, or effectiveness. So now, and many of the comments here, basically, because I do the comments when Mary's talking, are all about these cuts, and people here also another one about cutting the fire service. It's kind of, no appliances and so on. Just constant cuts to the services that are ultimately putting people in danger.
Well, basically, there's been a devastating impact of cuts in every aspect of policing and the ability of officers to fulfill the primary role of trying to keep people safe. And there's also a lot of worry about what happens if there is any big incident in Scotland, because Scotland is so big. People are spread out. If they don't have an adequate number of officers to send, if any big incident happens somewhere, they can't cover the country. It's ridiculous.
Well, there was that discussion before, Mary, about the traffic cops, right? And how there was only 2 cars or something for the whole country.
They were only going to have, basically with the cuts, they were estimating that overnight in Scotland, there was only going to be 1 police car out on the roads.
Which is great if you're a Ferrari owner, but perhaps if you're looking for safety on the roads.
Well, if you happen to be involved in a crash or something, there's 1 car covering the whole of Scotland. No. I mean, I would say that's just a failure at this point.
I mean, yeah. To be honest,
it's just not working.
To be honest, all of it's all of it's the consequence of absolutely shambolic spending decisions. Because the reason all these cuts are being made, the SNP will say it's Westminster, but it's not. Because if you look at the Scottish Fiscal Commission, going back the last 4 years, they've been regularly every year writing a report about social security spending. This is one of the consequences of the bright idea to hand more devolution over to Holyrood, giving Holyrood power over devolved welfare powers. What you've seen is a ballooning of the spending. Social security spending, as the SNP have rolled in ever more generous social security welfare benefits, which are great as long as you can pay for them. But the problem is the SNP haven't been able to figure that out. And you're now talking by 2027-28 a £6.8 billion shortfall in the budget. And so they're making cuts now in all these little areas because they can see this huge problem coming down the line. And they've been warned about this for the last 3-4 years, and they've done nothing about it.
Well, I think it's quite concerning when you've got David Kennedy, the head of the Scottish Police Federation, who is speaking out so strongly. I mean, headlines like "People may die," and "We can't cover a terrorist incident in Scotland." People should be alarmed. I think alarm bells are ringing. Definitely,
it's an outrage.
Yes, it's a terrible situation. Definitely, the police were against the centralisation of the forces, right? And it just now means that they're very. It's obviously easier to cut one force than it is to cut 8 or however many it was before. If you've got 8 people fighting against you and so on, it's. But I wonder how much of it's. It seems also at the same time they do have money for politically motivated policing, as it were. Hate crimes bill. They have a unit for that, which is getting up and running. And so it seems that if it's your pet project, they'll put the money into it.
Well, at the same time, you've got officers across the northeast have been ordered not to follow up on crimes such as break-ins and thefts. Unless they have CCTV evidence or they've got strong leads.
Yes, here, Grumpy Git says he was unlucky enough to be in a bad accident in 2010, and within 10 minutes of 4 or 5 traffic cars there, a helicopter mobile incident unit arrived in 30 minutes. Could they do that now?
No.
Perhaps not.
Well, those people in the M9, there was a crash in the M9 and the people weren't discovered for 3 days.
Yeah, well, that was a very poor set of circumstances, unfortunate for the people involved, although I'm not sure, there was an inquiry into it, and definitely lay on the police officer who didn't report the incoming call as well. Yeah, it's a terrible situation, especially, it seems... The question then, I suppose it comes from it, is how likely is it that there are going to be more terrorist threats coming up? And if this situation in the Middle East escalates, we've already seen many pro-Palestinian people on the streets and so on. Do you think, just as an aside, Dean, do you think there is a chance for more terrorism in the UK due to this? What's going on?
Yes, absolutely. The chief of the Met Police, I remember in 2001, wrote an article. I can't remember the newspaper. I think it was the Telegraph or the Times, and he stated there are gaps in our laws in terms of counter-terrorism, which is why the police have said, when you've had people screaming jihad in the Palestine protests in London, the police have been able to say, well, there are more than one way to interpret the word jihad. To be fair to the police, there are big gaps in our anti-terror legislation, because most of it goes back to the Tony Blair era, and it was written during the War on Terror era. There are big gaps now. And so we should be aware that, frankly, this is an area where we should be concerned, because there are bad actors out there. And if we end up with a situation where large numbers of people from the Middle East, like we saw in Syria, are forced migrated into Europe, we might not necessarily know who all these people are, if they're all genuine asylum claimants or whether there are bad actors trying to sneak in. And so, yeah, we should be a lot more on top of this than I think we are.
Definitely. Mary, good segment there.
Thank you. I think also it's not good to let the terrorists know that we don't have the police to cover it. To be honest.
That's a very good point there, mate.
Showing our cards.
Yes.
Yes,
They should be saying we've got millions of officers and
millions,
they're watching
millions.
everybody.
We don't even
Millions
know
of them.
whether we're playing poker or...
Right. Okay, very good. That was a good segment there, which kind of ties into the other one. Okay, as mentioned earlier, please donate if you can. You can also buy Amazing Majority t-shirts. You can subscribe to the channel, and you can like this particular show. Like that, hit that like button. That's what YouTube likes in particular, and that helps us get more exposure on the algorithm, which we're all slaves to every day. It's the moment you've all been waiting for. It is Zoomer of the Week.
Yay!
It's my favourite part of the show.
Right, here we go. Okay, well, it helps if you actually prepare the bit you're supposed to be doing. All right, so I'm supposed to rant about the ferries here, which have been in the news again because the Scottish Government's ferry procurement division has managed to spend £175 million of taxpayers' money on a ferry that's worth £70 million, twice. Not just once, twice. Anyway, the head of Ferguson Marine was on. So anyway, my nomination is for Scottish Government. But here's the head of Ferguson.
I've written the ferry procurement idiots.
Oh, well, that'll do. Procurement idiots. This is you could do this every week. There's
Yes.
a story on it. But anyway, here's the guy from Ferguson Marine.
I did say earlier that I thought a market price for this would be around 70 million if you were going to the market to buy one now. That was the figure I put in my letter to the Public Audit Committee last December.
Effectively, it's costing us 100 million, which we've wasted on these boats to get a boat that's worth 75 million, or 175 million is what we've paid for a boat that's worth 70 million.
That's running the simple maths. That seems to be the answer.
Wow.
The simple maths.
Wow, indeed.
The simple maths. The problem, I mean, that's the whole thing. It's like there's a simple maths here. 100 million. It cost 100 million extra, and how? Why?
What gets me is the smirk when he says that seems to be the answer. And he sort of smirks about it as if it's that really.
It's funny.
100 million, but where did the money go? This is the thing, because originally it was supposed to be about saving jobs, right? Mm-hmm. They were saving 100 jobs. Okay, 100 million. We'll give each person £1 million. That was 300 million. We'll give them £300,000.
I remember they did spend over £1 million on the turnaround director that did not turn it.
Oh, yes.
Don't forget that.
Yeah, but it's still another 99 to go after that.
Well, they've been doing all kinds of crazy stuff. I mean, they've been using, as who is it? Alan Jack points out, they've been using the wrong steel.
Yes.
They actually, it's ridiculous. I was reading today, and I can't remember the exact details, but they put like mild steel somewhere in the pipes or something where it's all going to be like water. They didn't even have the sense to know that it should be stainless steel.
Well, obviously there's no oversight. It's like, as they say, the definition of a camel is a horse designed by a committee. So it's just really like that on steroids as well. A camel on steroids designed by a committee. Anyway, whatever. So it just goes on and on and on. And at a certain point, it's like, okay, will these ferries ever come out in any decent form at all?
I don't think they'll ever sail. I really don't.
So.
And if they do sail, we still have to redo and redredge all the ports because they're not big enough for the ships that they've designed.
Yeah, it was mild steel and hydraulic rams. As soon as something says hydraulic, the first thing you should think of, obviously, is water.
Yes. Well,
and then,
yeah,
that's the clue is in the name.
Yeah, while all this is going on, I've got this thing here. They had the Isle of Man get their ferry for 78 million. No problem there. And it says, look inside the Isle of Man passenger ferry. I thought this photo was after a disaster or something because of the colour scheme. But it's actually quite nice.
They should sack their interior designer. Yeah, it looks like it's...
You walk in, I was like, what?
It looks like it's been tossed around in the waves there, doesn't it?
It's been in a storm or something. You're like, okay. Anyway, 78 million, 100 million. Oh, it's just, who cares? Monopoly money, not our money. Not in the, no, nobody cares. Until
Catherine says the ferries will be on eBay shortly.
Oh,
I don't
is
think
that-
they'll sell.
No, they won't. Minimum bid.
And the sellers won't have good reviews either.
Oh,
They won't have a good rating.
Just absolutely ridiculous. Anyway,
Okay, that's a
it's
good
worth
one,
a
Mark.
laugh.
Okay.
Okay, all
Well,
right.
it's not
a
funny for
tragedy.
the people who are relying on them.
Well, that's
And there was another one out of commission this week as well. Every week they're out. There's this one or that one is out of commission.
It's a big problem for the
Right.
island.
It's
terrible.
it's terrible. Dean, you're going to be up in just a second. Right, you're on.
Well, my Zoomer of the week is Stewart Hosie MP. I read this and I couldn't believe that he would have the gumption and temerity to say this. So he received a message from a constituent who was affected by Storm Babbitt. This constituent's home had flooded, his house was decimated, absolutely devastated. The man contacts his constituent MP, Stewart Hosie, and he replies, quote, "Too busy in Parliament to do anything," end quote.
Right, okay.
Imagine saying that to someone. He needs your help.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if he was busy in Parliament getting him millions of pounds to deal with the damage and so on, then maybe that could be excused. But I'm thinking he wasn't busy doing that.
Well, he is due to retire and step down in the next general election, so maybe one eye's on the exit door.
Both eyes on the exit door.
Because I did check in 2021-2022, Mr. Hosie's basic salary was £81,932. So
not bad.
But he's too busy to do anything for his constituent. But he
just writes that. He doesn't say, "Oh no, I'll try and help you in a day or two."
Or I'll get someone else to help you.
It was too busy to do anything. And
that's a real I cannot be arsed.
Yeah, he only showed an interest when Mr. Cease, the constituent, who said to the newspapers, quote, "My whole life is gone. Where are the people who should be doing things? There's no council members in the area." Remember, this is an SNP stronghold, East Dundee. And Mr. Hosie only started showing an interest when Mr. Cease told the Express, "I'm going to meet with a Labour councillor who's going to help me organise some way forward." As soon as it became public knowledge he was going to meet a Labour councillor, suddenly Mr. Hosie told AP News, "I'm more than happy to help any constituent and provide any assistance that I can." Funny that is.
Well, that's it. That's the big threat, isn't it? Now you can say to any SNP, "Well, I'm just going to go and get some Labour guy."
Yeah, now that they actually
that gives him the willies, so to speak. So how we know?
So he's my nominee anyway.
Oh God, I don't know.
Well, I've got tough competition this week.
They're a work-shy bunch. I mean, it's not as though they do a lot in Parliament anyway. I mean, really, what are they doing? Sitting around, not doing anything most of the time, whining. It doesn't take much energy to do that.
Whining and dining, that's what they're doing.
Oh, that's it, indeed. Mary, you're going to be up with the third Zoomer.
Mm-hmm. Well, I definitely think that you two guys have put up some tough competition for me, but I still think that I might win. I'm still in with a shout here because my Zoomer of the week is Phil Boswell, who claims that Nicola Sturgeon let MI5 agents into the SNP.
As you do.
If you don't know who Phil Boswell is, he is a former Coatbridge MP and claims traitors have taken over the party and said members have to wake up. He says, you look at the MI5 intervention and look at the list of individuals that have been employed. He also called Sturgeon a liar and accused her of conning us about independence. Well, he's not wrong there, we have to say. That's not bad.
Well, I noticed there was actually quite a few of them this week. They were like, "Oh, we didn't realise Nicola Sturgeon didn't have a plan." Like, okay.
Maybe had a quiz.
We're just finding out now that it happened. Anyway, this Phil Boswell, I have to say, this goes back a little bit because he's one of these, as Annie Wells would say, he's a tinfoil hat kind of guy. But I think he's been inspired by, I don't know if you remember, but before there was a guy called, a former MSP called Campbell Martin. He was expelled from the party earlier this year because he was saying that Secret Service agents have risen through the SNP ranks and can now influence its decision-making. And he says that the party's gender policies are part of a plan by the spies to make it unelectable and to harm the Scottish independence movement.
So Lorna
He said,
Peter's the spy.
He's great, this guy. He said, He said the SNP is completely compromised. You have to hand it to the British state. It has played a blinder.
Right,
Today's SNP is so corrupted by British agents that it has sidelined independence and embraced gender policies that make the party unelectable. So this must be the only way that they can actually, this is the only
rationalize.
Yeah, they're trying to rationalize, like, why has independence been sidelined, and why are we focusing so much on gender policies? Oh, I know, we've been infiltrated by MI5 because they've got nothing better to do than infiltrate the SNP.
Well, it's obvious Nicola Sturgeon was recruited at an early age by agents of the British Empire and twirled their moustaches and smoked cigars and so on, and said to her, look, you can retire in 20 years and you can, a nice pension. We'll give you a camper van. All kinds of things.
We'll make sure you pass your driving test.
You can live in a nice little house in Uddingston.
But here's what you have to do. You just have to, introduce some gender nonsense in, let's see, 2020, right, okay?
Well, that makes sense, because as soon as she did that, then she basically took off, didn't she? As soon as she,
That's right. That's it.
It does all make sense, actually.
I was hoping the spy would turn out to be maybe Lady Penelope or, George Smiley or some
something like that
figure.
Yes.
It's looking like it's either Nicola Sturgeon or Lorna Slater.
Right, okay. Right, Dean, seeing as you're on there, you can choose the Zoomer. You can you can
definitely choose your own.
You've got your own, which was that guy, Hosie, and then Ferry, procurement people, or Mary's.
Well, I think ferries have a chance to win in the future, so I won't choose them. That's a perennial runner-up.
Yes.
I do like the conspiracy tinfoil hat with Phil Boswell, but I have to choose my own, partly because mainly because I can't, as someone who had an uncle as an MP, I can't imagine being an MP for such a long time and saying something like that to your constituent who's dealing with a flood. Sorry, too busy. Handing it's unbelievable. And
yes,
it's Zoomer territory. He's off to retirement country now.
I think you've chosen the right one, actually.
Right. Well, it's your choice. It's fine. By me, I don't think Ferry's is not going to win. I mean, it's just
Ferry's wins every now and again anyway.
It's always going to be a choice.
Yes, it's always going to be in there.
But Stewart, Hosie, I mean, really.
Mary will put that up. Yeah, what a nutter. I mean, really. Okay, so, thank you for being with us on the show tonight. Huge thank you to Dean for being with us and providing some expert commentary on the Middle East, and Humza Yousaf and Scottish politics as well. And of course to Mary for doing the chat and for her segment too. So I'll leave you with the thought of the week. The only thing necessary for you'd mentioned Edmund Burke earlier on, didn't you?
Yes.
The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil was for good men to uncritically repeat Hamas casualty numbers. That's his latest version. Anyway, so please do call out that when you see it. Anyway, but hopefully we'll have more Scottish news when you come back next week. We're so happy to have you all with us on Scotland's #1 politics chat, pro-UK or anti-nationalist, whatever your flavour you would like. We will see you next Wednesday on November the 1st, new month. And please introduce a friend to the show you think they may enjoy it. Until then, thank you from me.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for all your comments.
And thank you for having me, both of you.
Oh, thank you very much. Our pleasure. We'll see you all next week.